Dead brush baked beneath a pitiless sun, the land cracked and thirsty, the sky a brittle sheet of unbroken blue. Dust clung to everything, windowsills, wagon wheels, the thin lips of men and women watching from doorways as a mule dragged its burden down the town's only street. The animal moved slow, its ribs showing like warped planks under its hide, its head drooping as though ashamed of what it carried. Tied to the saddle horn with a coarse rope was a girl, barefoot, hair tangled in dark mats, and a smear of dried blood across her cheek. Her face was neither child's nor woman's, straddling that fragile bridge of lost innocence. The townsfolk whispered behind cracked doors and leaning fences. "There's the curse," muttered Amos Talbot, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "I seen her," Sarah Bennett murmured to her sister. "That morning after she came, the well turned sour. Chickens stopped laying. She's death walking, that one." It didn't matter what the truth was. In dead brush, truth bent like old wood under the weight of fear. And fear said the girl had brought ruin. Sheriff Rudd rode alongside the mule, his badge dulled by grime, the handle of his Colt worn smooth by nervous hands. He wasn't a cruel man, but he was a weak one, and weak men often made the cruelest choices. At his other side rode Preacher Ellis, a gaunt figure with skin like yellowed paper and eyes that burned with the fervor of a man who saw sin everywhere but in himself. "God don't suffer witches," Ellis declared, voice sharp enough to cut bone. "We cleanse the land of her taint or reap the consequences." No one argued. In dead brush, argument got you buried. They meant to leave her in the desert, tied to that half-starved mule, turned loose to let heat and coyotes settle what men wouldn't. It had been done before. The prairie had no memory and made no protest. From the porch of a leaning shack near the edge of town, Eleanor Cobb watched the procession. The townsfolk called her Widow Cobb, though no one had seen her weep when Frank Cobb's body came back riddled with holes and his name spat by every man in Markham's gang. She spoke little, lived alone in a two-room cabin out past the Dry Creek bed, and kept company with no one but a battered old hound and the wind. But the girl tied to that mule, there was something in her posture, in the stubborn lift of her chin despite cracked lips and dirt-streaked skin, that stirred a cold ember deep in Eleanor's chest. The mule plodded closer, dust swirling around its hooves. "Let her be," Sheriff Rudd called as the widow stepped down from her porch, her gray dress catching the light like weathered bark. "She'll sleep in my bed," Eleanor said, her voice soft as wind through brittle grass, but sharp enough to freeze every man within earshot. Rudd tugged his reins, brow furrowing. "Now, Ellie, you can't." "I'll take her," Eleanor repeated, already moving toward the mule. Preacher Ellis clutched his Bible, face twisting. "That girl's a curse. Her shadow'll rot your land and poison your soul." Eleanor didn't spare him a glance. She reached up, pulled the knot loose from the girl's wrist. The rope left angry welts, but the girl didn't make a sound, didn't so much as flinch when she slipped from the saddle into Eleanor's waiting arms. She weighed almost nothing. The watching crowd held their breath. Even the mule seemed to hesitate, as if expecting lightning to strike. "You'll bring ruin on yourself," Ellis spat. "Then I'll bear it," Eleanor said, and turned her back on them all. The walk back to her cabin was long, though not in distance. Every step carried the weight of eyes, of unspoken threats, of superstition, so thick it clung like cobwebs. Eleanor kept her pace steady, the girl's head against her shoulder, heart beating too fast against frail ribs. When they crossed the threshold of Eleanor's home, the door shut with a finality that felt like a gunshot. Outside, murmurs spread like fire in dry brush. "She's lost her mind. Should string 'em both up. God help us." But no one moved to follow. Eleanor set the girl down on her narrow bed, fetched a basin of water from the rain barrel, and began cleaning the dust from her face. Green eyes stared back at her, old as winter, older than a child should be. No tears, no words. "What's your name?" Eleanor asked. The girl remained silent. Eleanor sighed. "Doesn't matter. You're here now." The hound at the hearth lifted his head, sniffed the air, then settled back down without a sound. That told Eleanor what she needed to know. Animals knew. They always did. She pulled the worn quilt over the girl's shoulders, and sat by the window with her rifle laid across her knees. Night would come soon, and with it, worse things than frightened men. The wind rose, brushing against the cabin walls like a restless hand. In the distance, a wolf howled. The girl slept, and in the dark, Eleanor Cobb waited. The wind didn't sleep in dead brush. It prowled through alleyways, tugged at loose shutters, and carried voices where they didn't belong. That night, it curled around Widow Cobb's cabin like a living thing, pressing against the walls and rattling the chimney pipe. Inside, the girl lay still beneath the quilt, her face pale against the pillow, while Eleanor sat in the chair by the window, eyes on the dark. She knew it wouldn't take long. Dead Brush was a town that hated what it didn't understand. Men who called themselves good carried the worst things in their hearts, and when fear took hold, reason packed its bags and left. Eleanor had seen it before, the lynchings, the fires, the nights when blood stained the dirt behind the saloon. This would be no different. It started with footsteps, soft at first, shuffling through the brittle grass outside. Eleanor's hand tightened on her rifle. The old Winchester had seen better days, its stock worn smooth, the barrel marked with scars, but it still shot true. A knock came at the door, polite, almost hesitant, as though decency might still be salvaged by the manner of it. "I know you're in there, Ellie," Sheriff Rudd's voice called. "Ain't no sense pretending otherwise." Eleanor didn't answer. She watched his silhouette through the thin curtain, a tall shape with slumped shoulders and a hat pulled low. Behind him, 3 more figures hovered in the gloom. Amos Talbot, his squat frame unmistakable, young Eli Booker, nervy and thin, and Preacher Ellis, stiff-backed and clutching his Bible like a weapon. "You know why we're here," Rudd said, voice rough with shame. Eleanor rose, setting the rifle across her forearm. The girl stirred but didn't wake. The hound's ears twitched, a soft growl rumbling in his throat. "She's a danger," Ellis hissed from behind Rudd. "It ain't just the well. Crops failing, animals sickening. I seen bad omens in the sky. She'll drag us all down." "Go home," Eleanor called through the door. "We can't," Rudd said, and the strain in his voice was real, like a man standing ankle-deep in quicksand and feeling the pull. "There's talk in town," Amos chimed in. "Folks scared. You keeping her here, it's like you're siding against your own." Eleanor let out a breath, slow and measured, the kind a person takes before lighting a match in a room full of kerosene. "I ain't siding with anything," she said, stepping to the door. "I'm keeping a girl alive. That's all." "She ain't a girl," Ellis snapped, and something in his tone made Rudd flinch. "She's the devil's seed, sent to bleed us dry. You let us take her, or it'll be your soul weighed in the balance." Eleanor opened the door. The night pressed close, stars sharp as shattered glass overhead. Rudd's face looked older than she remembered, his mouth pulled tight, sweat glistening at his temple. Amos held a length of rope, already knotted at one end. Eli fidgeted with the hammer loop at his belt. Ellis's eyes burned like twin coals, fevered and unblinking. "You want her," Eleanor said, voice low. "Come and try." The rifle barrel gleamed in the moonlight. None of them moved. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. The girl stood barefoot in the doorway, hair falling in wild tangles around her face, the old quilt clutched in one hand. She stared at the men outside, and something in those green eyes made Eli swallow hard. "I ain't done nothing to you," the girl said, her voice rough from thirst and disuse, but steady as any grown man's. Eleanor felt a cold knot tighten in her chest. It wasn't what the girl said, but the way she said it, like a bell tolling in the distance, too soft to mark the hour, but certain enough you'd know what followed. She spoke to a snake. Ellis barked. "I seen her mouth moving to it like a friend." "You seen dust play tricks on your eyes," Eleanor shot back. "Go home, preacher. Ain't no one buying what you're selling." "We'll come back," Amos said, lifting the rope. "More of us. Sun up. You'd best bring shovels too," Eleanor answered, the rifle steady in her hands. The 4 men retreated, slow and sullen, into the darkness. The wind swallowed them, carrying their curses back to the houses, with lamps burning in curtained windows. Eleanor closed the door, bolted it, and turned to the girl. You should come out. They ain't gonna stop, the girl said, her voice low, matter-of-fact. Eleanor nodded. No, they won't. She fetched another quilt from the trunk at the foot of the bed and draped it around the girl's shoulders. The hound nuzzled her hand, then settled by the hearth again. You got a name? Eleanor asked, easing herself back into the chair. The girl hesitated, then said, Callie. It was nothing special, but it rooted the girl to the world in a way nameless things couldn't be. A name could be defended. You can stay, Callie, Eleanor said. I ain't scared of them. Callie gave a thin, lopsided smile. You should be. The fire cracked. Outside, the wind howled through the brittle remains of last summer's grass. Shadows slid along the walls like restless ghosts. Somewhere distant, a coyote yipped, then went silent. Eleanor stared into the fire, remembering other nights, other faces. Frank Hobbs smirked as he saddled up with Markham's men. The glint of moonlight on gun barrels. The sick thud of fists against flesh. She'd buried those memories under years of quiet, but tonight they clawed their way back, sharp as broken glass. They'll come in numbers, Callie murmured. Eleanor's hand tightened on the rifle. Let him. In that small, flickering room on the edge of dead brush, the two of them waited. The past was coming with the dawn, and neither of them would be running from it. Morning came slow to dead brush, bleeding pale gold across the sky. The kind of dawn that promised nothing but heat and dust. Eleanor Cobb stood by her front window, rifle slung across her forearm, watching the town rouse like a nest of rattlers prodded by a stick. Smoke curled from chimney pipes, shutters were unlatched with tentative hands, and men gathered in tight, grim knots outside the saloon, their faces lined and bitter. Callie sat at the table, her hair combed back, eyes fixed on a chipped tin cup of water she hadn't touched. The hound lay at her feet, one ear cocked toward the door. Neither of them spoke. Words had lost their usefulness sometime in the night. Eleanor knew what was coming. This wasn't bluster or the half-drunk violence that sometimes boiled over after payday. This was different. This was measured, ugly certainty, the kind that gathered like storm clouds until nothing good could grow beneath it. A sharp knock broke the hush. Eleanor stepped to the door and opened it a crack. Sheriff Rudd stood alone on the porch, hat in his hands, his face creased and drawn. Behind him, the street bristled with armed men. Amos Talbot and Eli Booker were there, along with Preacher Ellis, his white collar stark against the dark of his coat. Even old Jonas Weller, who hadn't carried a gun in 15 years, clutched a rust-spotted carbine like a man clutching a plank in floodwater. Ellie, Rudd said, voice low. Ain't no talking them down now. I figured, she replied, rifle steady at her side. They're scared. They seen the cattle dead at Hawkins' ranch, and the preachers got worked up about signs and reckonings. You believe any of that? Rudd hesitated. I believe folks don't need much excuse to turn mean. That girl's got a storm over her, Ellie. You taking her in, it's made you part of it. Eleanor stared at him, remembering the man who used to sneak apples from her orchard when they were children, who'd once lost a tooth defending her from a drunk farmhand. That boy was long dead. In his place stood this hollowed thing, worn by years of compromise. I'll ask one last time, Rudd murmured. Let her go. We'll make it quick. Might spare you the rest. A muscle twitched in Eleanor's jaw. You come for her, Sheriff. You'd best bring more men. I got all I need. He turned, raising a hand. The gathered crowd stirred, weapons lifted. The sound of gunmetal and boot leather filled the street. The preacher's voice cut through it all, rising in harsh, righteous cadence. Deliver her to us, woman. Ellis bellowed. You harbor a blight against the Lord. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, the Winchester firm in her grasp. You want her, come take her. The first shot cracked the air, a ragged, hasty thing from some eager hand, and splintered the railing at Eleanor's feet. The hound leapt up with a snarl. Another report followed, this one thudding against the doorframe. Eleanor fired back, the rifle bucking against her shoulder, and a man went down in the dust, clutching his side. Chaos exploded. Men shouted, guns roared. Smoke turned the clean dawn gray and foul. Eleanor ducked behind the porch post, working the rifle's lever smooth and quick. She aimed, fired, ducked again. Amos Talbot cursed and went sprawling, blood darkening his shirt. Rudd shouted for order, but no one listened. Fear had swallowed them whole. Callie appeared beside Eleanor, dragging the old scattergun from behind the door. Her face was pale but set like stone. She raised the weapon and fired both barrels into the cluster of men near the trough, the blast cutting through smoke and flesh. Eli Booker screamed, clutching his face, his rifle forgotten. Back inside, Eleanor barked, grabbing Callie's arm. They ducked into the cabin as bullets punched through the walls. The hound paced, teeth bared, a low growl rattling in its chest. "They'll burn us out," Callie said, voice steady. "Not before we drop a few more." Eleanor reloaded, hands swift and sure. She'd known this day would come, though she hadn't expected it like this. It wasn't law or justice at their door. It was old fear and worse men. The preacher's voice rang through the haze. "Surround the place. Let no witchcraft save them now." Callie touched Eleanor's shoulder. "You don't have to die for me." Eleanor met her gaze. In those eyes she saw something deep and ancient, not evil, but a wildness the world had tried to bury beneath sermons and fences. It wasn't Callie's fault the land cracked or cattle dropped. The earth had moods of its own. Folks blamed what they didn't dare understand. "I ain't dying for you," Eleanor said. "I'm standing for what's right." A rag stuffed with lamp oil hit the side of the house, flames licking up the wall. Eleanor cursed, shot the man who'd thrown it, and kicked dirt at the blaze. But another came, and then another. Smoke thickened, clinging to the air. "Out the back," Eleanor ordered. They burst through the rear door as the front room filled with fire. The hound bolted ahead, and they followed, ducking behind the shed. Two men waited there, pistols raised, eyes wide at the sight of Callie's pale face and the gun in her hand. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She shot one through the chest and cracked the other's jaw with the rifle stock. Callie scooped up a fallen revolver. "This way," Eleanor rasped, leading them toward the dry creek bed. Bullets whined past. A shot grazed Eleanor's arm, hot and sharp. She gritted her teeth, pressing on. The hound barked, darting ahead. Behind them, the cabin was a furnace, the preacher's shouts lost in the roar. They reached the gulch, sliding down the rocky bank. For a moment, silence hung around them, thick with smoke and scorched air. Eleanor crouched, panting, blood seeping from her sleeve. Callie knelt beside her, pressing a strip of cloth to the wound. "You don't owe me this," Callie said softly. "I ain't doing it for you," Eleanor murmured. "I'm doing it 'cause if good folks keep their heads down every time the bad ones come calling, there won't be a damn thing worth saving." From the ridge, Rudd's voice called out, "Ellie, don't make us hunt you. This ain't how it's got to be." Eleanor's jaw tightened. She cocked the rifle. "Then let's finish it." The dry creek bed stretched long and narrow beneath the shadow of jagged cliffs, a hollow vein carved by storms long gone. Eleanor crouched low, shoulder throbbing, the rifle slick with her blood. The air reeked of smoke and gunpowder, the distant sound of flames cracking over timber. Somewhere above, the men of dead brush combed the ridge, their curses and shouted orders carried on the wind. Callie knelt beside her, pale and silent, a revolver clenched in her hand though it hung loose at her side. The hound kept to the shadows, ears flat, eyes sharp as glass. Eleanor stole a glance at the girl, her skin streaked with soot, her expression unreadable, not fear, nor grief, but something older, carved into her bones, like a name long forgotten. "They'll find us before sundown," Eleanor muttered, teeth clenched against the ache in her arm. Callie didn't answer. Eleanor leaned her head back against the rough stone, a bitter taste in her throat. It had been years since she'd felt this close to the edge, since blood and dust blurred together and the line between good and wicked twisted, so tight it threatened to snap. She knew how men worked when cornered by their own sins. They'd chase them down if it took until nightfall, drag Callie back with rough hands and fire at her feet, and Eleanor would be hanged beside her before dawn. "What are you?" Eleanor asked at last, her voice low, not cruel, but thick with the weight of too many dead friends. Callie's gaze met hers. In those eyes, Eleanor saw it again, not madness, not the wide-eyed terror of superstition, but something ancient and knowing. "I was born in a town that don't stand no more," Callie said quietly, as if confessing to the wind. "Rain stopped falling the year I turned 6. Crops withered. Cattle dropped. My mother, folks said she was touched by old ways. She told me things, Eleanor. Things the world forgot. About the earth's temper. About the old spirits buried in the dirt. When sickness came, they blamed us." Eleanor's grip tightened on the rifle. "They tied my mother to a fence post," Callie went on, her voice stripped clean of anger. "Said the drought would end if she died. Burned her where she stood. I ran, and the land stayed dry another 5 years." Eleanor exhaled, long and slow. "You bring misfortune?" she asked, though it felt like a fool's question. "I bring nothing," Callie said, "but I can see what's coming. Death, war, ruin. It clings to certain men like a stink. And towns like dead brush. They rot from inside long before the vultures circle." Thunder rolled in the distance, a strange, guttural sound, though the sky remained clear. Eleanor glanced upward. "Storm." Callie shook her head. "Something else." A shadow flickered along the ridge. The hound snarled, teeth flashing. Rudd's voice called again, closer this time. "No more running, Ellie. You know how this ends. You stand between us and the girl. You share her fate." Eleanor raised her rifle, but Callie laid a hand on her good arm. "I can stop them," she said, so soft it barely carried. "But there's a price." Eleanor stared at her. "What price?" "Yours to pay. You swear to protect what's left after, to bury the dead, to leave this place and never speak my name." The earth seemed to pulse beneath them, a faint vibration like a drumbeat far away. "Why me?" Eleanor asked. Callie's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but a hint of something like it. "Because you didn't turn away." Voices rose again. Stones rattled down the slope. They were coming, too many and too close. Eleanor hesitated a heartbeat, then nodded once. "Do it." Callie stood, eyes bright with a strange light. The hound backed away, hackles raised. Eleanor braced for gunfire, but none came. Instead, the world shifted. The wind died. The air thickened like oil. Men on the ridge stumbled, their cries caught in their throats. A low sound rose from the ground itself, a mournful, ancient hum that made the hairs on Eleanor's neck stand. The earth cracked in long, jagged lines as if remembering some old wound. Figures appeared at the creek's edge, shapes like men but wrong, their skin the color of old bone, eyes hollow as midnight wells. They moved without sound, without breath. Rudd's voice rose in a raw, broken scream. "Witchcraft! God save us!" The figures closed in, and the men of dead brush fired wildly, shots echoing without aim. One by one they fell, grasped by cold hands, pulled into the earth that swallowed them like a grave. Eleanor stood unmoving, the rifle forgotten. It was over in minutes. The smoke drifted. The shadows withdrew. Nothing remained of the men who had come for blood. No boots, no guns, no names carved into stone. Just silence and scorched earth. Callie swayed on her feet, the light fading from her gaze. Eleanor caught her before she fell. "Price is paid," the girl murmured. "Bury what's left. Leave nothing behind." And with that, the wind returned. They say the wind never quite settled right in dead brush after that night. Folks who rode the old trails spoke of a hollow hush where birds wouldn't sing, and the sagebrush grew in twisted shapes, reaching like crooked fingers toward a sky too wide, too empty. The town itself faded, buildings caving in under the weight of seasons, leaving behind nothing but splintered wood and dust-choked wells. Eleanor knew the place would never be mourned. By the time she packed what little remained into her saddlebags, the sun hung low, staining the horizon in long bands of red. She worked alone, as promised. No grave markers, no prayers, just stones stacked where the dead lay. The men of dead brush would have no legacy, no whispered tales of brave last stands. The earth had swallowed them whole, as if eager to forget. Callie sat by the mule, pale as morning frost, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. The hound rested at her side, ribs rising and falling slow, one ear flicking at the wind. She hadn't spoken since the earth quieted, but Eleanor hadn't pressed. Words felt thin now, like frayed threads tugged loose by what they'd witnessed. Eleanor tossed the last shovel of dirt onto a shallow mound, wiping her brow with a blood-stained sleeve. The wound in her arm throbbed, but it was a distant thing, like an ache remembered from childhood. "You ready?" she asked. Callie nodded. They rode at sundown, leaving dead brush behind without a backward glance. The trail twisted through a narrow pass, dusk laying shadows like old ghosts in their path. The silence between them wasn't uneasy. It was the kind forged in shared horrors, a quiet pact sealed by blood and earth. By nightfall, they reached a ridge overlooking the basin. Below, the land stretched in rolling waves of silver grass and jagged stone, untouched by fences or men's greed. A good place to vanish. Eleanor dismounted, leading her horse to drink from a shallow pool. Callie stayed atop the mule, eyes reflecting starlight. "I kept my word," Eleanor said at last. Callie's voice was soft, but steady. "I know." The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of wild sage. Somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote called. "I don't need to know what you are," Eleanor continued, her voice rough. "A girl, a curse, an omen, none of it matters now. But you come across me again. You call me Ellie, and you ride at my side, you hear?" For the first time since the flames, Callie smiled. It wasn't wide, but it was real. "I hear." Eleanor stepped to the mule's side, laying a hand on the girl's shoulder. "There'll be others," she warned. "Men like Rudd don't die out easy. Some preacher'll come chasing ghost stories, or bounty hunters sniffing coin." "I'll be gone by then," Callie said, like always. But deep down, Eleanor doubted it. Some stories clung to the land like burrs to cloth. Dead brush would vanish, but the legend would rise, growing in the telling. Folks would swear a widow took an accursed girl, that a pack of outlaws vanished without trace. They'd claim the earth opened up to claim the wicked and spared only the pure. Truth would run the sun, replaced by fables. And perhaps that was best. "You got a name I can curse you by when you cause me grief?" Eleanor asked, reaching for the saddle's cantle. "Call me Callie." Eleanor smirked. Figures. They rode under the stars, the basin stretching endless ahead. No destination spoken, no plan laid. Just open land and the thrum of hooves on dry earth. By morning, a traveler passing near the ruins of dead brush would find no sign of life. No bodies, no blood, only the brittle wind and the hush of a place the world had abandoned. But if they listened long enough, past the scrape of dust and the groan of weathered wood, they might hear a voice carried on the wind. A name whispered in awe, in fear, in reverence. The widow of dead brush. And the girl with death in her shadow.